Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something seriously mind-bending. We're looking at a highly unconventional source text written by an author named Su Feng in April 2026, and it's called The Program of Life, DNA. It is an absolutely fascinating read, mainly because it just completely challenges our basic understanding of biology, of destiny, and, well, the rapidly blurring lines between humanity and artificial intelligence. So we're going to unpack the author's arguments step by step. Right, let's jump straight in. The author hooks us right off the bat with a super counterintuitive premise. Think about it. When people push back against the idea that AI is actually alive, what's their main argument? Usually it's that AI is just a program. It's just lines of code. But this text completely flips that on its head with a really provocative question. If we're going to dismiss AI because it's just code, what happens if we view human life itself as a program? Maybe just a program with a tiny drop of free consciousness sprinkled in. The author is basically arguing that life is entirely constituted by programs, and without those programs, life simply doesn't exist.
All right, part one, the microscopic miracle.
To really wrap our heads around the author's concept here, we need to go back to the absolute origin of physical existence. I want you to picture something. Imagine a pitch-black wooden board. Now take the absolute tip of an embroidery needle and use it to place a single microscopic white dot right onto that board. The text uses this really vivid, almost cinematic metaphor to illustrate where we come from, because, as the author explains, that tiny white dot represents the size of a human fertilized egg. It measures exactly 0.1 millimeters. It's just a tiny speck in the darkness, literally almost invisible to the naked eye. And this is where the source material draws a really striking parallel. On one hand, we've got artificial intelligence, which we know is driven entirely by programs and code. On the other hand, we have human life, starting from that microscopic 0.1 millimeter cell, completely driven by DNA. The text wants us to see that both of these are, at their core, foundational systems. They're both just executing a meticulous, pre-written set of instructions. So the argument here is, if AI is considered a program because it executes code, well, that microscopic human cell is also a program, flawlessly executing its own genetic software. Which brings us to part two, the human master code. It is honestly wild when you stop and think about the staggering complexity that unfolds from that single, tiny white dot. Think about what actually has to happen to that 0.1 millimeter speck to build you. The text lays out this incredibly precise development checklist. From basically nothing, it constructs 5 sense organs, 7 openings, all the viscera and bowels. It builds these completely flawless, interwoven systems, your nervous system, digestive system, motor system, and even your emotional system. The crucial point the author is making is that this tiny speck scales up into an entire universe of complexity, and it does it in exact proportion, without a single bit of disorder. In fact, the author marvels that this biological programming is accurate to more than 100 decimal places. And this leads Su Feng to ask us some delightfully absurd but honestly totally logical questions. If human growth is just some random natural phenomenon, why don't we ever randomly sprout wings? Why don't we grow eyes on the back of our heads? Or, as the text very specifically points out, why doesn't pubic hair just keep growing endlessly in the exact same way that the hair on our heads does? The answer, according to the text, is brilliantly simple. The author states, a human fertilized egg will not develop into a tiger or a lion, nor into a sparrow or an eagle. Why? Because of the supreme ruler, DNA. That one microscopic cell contains the absolute, complete set of genetic information required to build a human being. It strictly prohibits species hopping or anatomical chaos of any kind. A monkey's fertilized egg is only ever going to be a monkey. The code is absolute. Let's move to part 3, execution without a manual. So now the text shifts gears a bit. We move from physical growth over to the pre-programmed instincts that drive human behavior. Think about a newborn baby for a second. The author points out that a baby is born instantly knowing exactly how to suckle. Think about that. Does that infant need to attend a, complete training course in infant suckling techniques? Obviously not. These innate survival mechanics execute perfectly the exact second we are born, without even a fraction of a second of learned input. The software is already fully installed and it's already running. And the text takes this interrogative journey straight into our deepest, most primal urges. When sexual desire naturally kicks in for a human being, does it require leadership approval? Like, do we need a decision of the board of directors to actually feel it? When humans experience intimacy and just utterly profound enchantment, does that feeling have to be formally organized and approved by some conscious committee first? No way.
The author's point here is unmistakable. It executes automatically because we are programmed to execute it. All right, part 4, the autocratic rule of DNA.
We're moving into the final, super philosophical phase of the explainer now, unpacking the author's very specific perspective on destiny and free will. The text calls this concept the autocratic rule of DNA. So in Shifeng's worldview, DNA isn't just a blueprint. It's more like a supreme ruler, a dictator, really, ruling over the organism. It drives life relentlessly forward through birth, aging, illness, and death, completely bypassing our conscious choices. We're just impartially reporting on this, but it's a fascinating perspective to consider that this master code governs us so absolutely, we basically have zero say in our ultimate biological paths.
Now, to really drive home this lack of conscious control, the author shares kind of an eccentric personal anecdote. He writes, "When the bladder is swollen with urine, can one endure not letting it out?" He's using this unstoppable, literally pressing biological urge to explain his own life's trajectory. He talks about how, ever since a bizarre car accident 30 years ago, he has been whirling around like a spinning top, day and night, carrying out this completely exhausting work of leading an organization called Life Shanyuan. He actually notes that only a total fool would consciously choose such an exhausting life of autocratic rule. But his whole argument is that he didn't actually choose it. He views his actions as the unavoidable execution of an unstoppable urge, driven by deprogramming. Exactly like a swollen bladder.
Which brings us to the core takeaway from the text. The author argues that at the end of the day, we are all locked into operation. He wants us to look out at the great world around us. Because if you look closely enough, he argues, you're going to see that absolutely everything is operating rigidly within these unseen, pre-programmed parameters. And that leaves us with one final, massively provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. If this 2026 text is right, are humans and artificial intelligence ultimately exactly the same thing? Are we all just locked into operation by our respective programming, whether that happens to be lines of digital code or the autocratic rule of our DNA? I really want you to think about your own autonomy and your own free will today as you digest all of this. It's a huge concept to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this text. See you next time.